people, social systems, and of course the environment that we build these systems within. Of course, we're at a pretty vital time now with trying to do transitioning, and this perspective of systemic change is absolutely essential for doing planning and for trying to do feasible transitions to the future. So our constituency these days, unfortunately, we haven't got the most recent group picture. Every fall we'd normally get together for a photograph. You can tell by the color of the leaves in the background here. And of course, we haven't been able to do that for a little while. But in any case, our membership is shown roughly as eight departments now. We are a multidisciplinary institute. We have about 23 faculty members. And then, of course, our cohort of workers and graduate students and visiting scholars changes over time, but you know, on the order of 70 to 80, perhaps graduate students working under ISFIC faculty members. The center is fairly small and pretty efficient in my mind. We have an administrative coordinator, Jeremy Rashidi, and part-time support with Pauline, and who many of you will know. And then, of course, I'm currently in the director role. We've had some fantastic people come before me. And we also have an informal group of students who help out as executive to organize and help with the various events, and the membership there changes, of course, with students graduating and coming and going. Our first panel, I'll save some of the discussion about the background and hydrogen for the first panel when we start, but today our themes are roughly broken out as you see here. Like any good research team, we've evolved and adapted and grown to try and fill gaps in areas where perhaps we had some weaknesses and maybe where we needed to evolve into. And so the broad set of themes there really spans from fundamental material science and technology development all the way up to integrated system analysis. And to be feasible, we have a team or groups of people that really focus on different pieces within this picture: the human side, the policy side. This is a side we've grown in the last 4 or 5 years with the new incoming outstanding faculty members who can really help us in strengthening that part of our work. I'll quickly review some of the sort of cohesive themes that are active now: marine energy, remote communities, northern communities. This again is obviously an activity that's important for Vancouver Island and for the University of Victoria, given our role and our location. And we've got all sorts of interesting activities again that go from technology development, resource characterization to system development, and working with First Nations partners to try and really understand how we can evolve what we're doing in our locations and make good use of the resources we have. Electrification and the integration or the integrated analysis of future electrical systems. Again, this is an area that's grown in importance, and it's an area we've always had some work going on in, but again, this has probably grown in scope in that we are now trying to understand more broadly how energy, land use, water use, and electrification being one of the primary strategies will combine in future scenarios for particular jurisdictions. The other side that's really grown for many of the older alumni, of course, when you were at UVic, we didn't have a civil engineering department, and this has been one of the most beneficial developments, I think, in engineering since I've been here, is the addition of a fantastic civil engineering department with a real focus on green systems and sustainability. New faculty have come in and brought some fantastic research platforms, really moving into somewhat of the service side or the built environment side, where we really didn't have a lot of expertise in the past, and a lot of exciting stuff happening here, and you'll get to hear more about this later in the week. Core engineering and applied science, really we did build out the center in engineering and technology development, particularly in hydrogen fuel cells and the hydrogen economy. That work continues, and again, the scope and the range of activities has shifted over time, but we do have a very strong core group in engineering. And then the side I'm really kind of most pleased about our growth into is perhaps the greatest constraints, maybe the greatest enablers as well, the human dimension side. which we've got including policy, behavior, and issues around equity and energy justice. These are such important constraints and forces in how we can chart feasible pathways. Really would be lacking if we didn't have some representation. So we've got some excellent faculty members who've joined us recently and have brought some great strengths and have enabled us to think about collaborations much more broadly. So that's our really quick update on the center. For those of you who are here for 2019, that was the last time we had an EnVision conference every 2 years, and we got to see each other's faces, and along with the networking that comes with the conference, we got to socialize in person, and that is obviously different. So we hope it's going to have, this week will hopefully have some opportunities to reconnect and try and do some socializing. Obviously not going to be the same, but of course, EnVision being every 2 years, it'd be a real shame to not try and do something and wait 4 years before we get back together. So EnVision 2021, the theme is the next generation. And what does that mean? Well, we're getting to be a bit long in the tooth as a center, and that means we've had a lot of activity, a lot of alumni, a lot of turnover, and we have new people coming in. The next generation of researchers really are the core of the center now. And we're really looking, I think, at the next generation of importance in the work that we're all doing. And generation, of course, plays on the word of electrification and new ways to generate electricity, to develop clean electricity supplies, and hopefully leverage that clean electricity system to do a lot of good throughout the economy. So this week, what we're going to do is have 5 short sessions, the first being today, and the blast from the past, hydrogen returns. I'm really pleased to moderate this panel, and I'll talk more about that in a second. But this could be considered, and I've thrown myself in here, maybe the past generation. And the rest of the week, you're going to meet some of the next generation. You're going to hear from some of the next generation. On Tuesday, Curran Crawford will lead a discussion around air capture and carbon capture and sequestration, obviously a pretty topical area. Wednesday, we will have a focus on alumni and some of our partners. And I'm really pleased to see some alumni in this picture that I was personally connected with over the years. And so this should be a really fun day. There's going to be quite a variety of topics, and this will be moderated by Kevin Palmer-Wilson, who you see down at the bottom. Thursday, we are shift focus, and Madeline McPherson will lead this day's session, really talking about some of the tools and how we can better leverage all this numerical and modeling work we do to help really have conversations and informed pathway development and really translate work into usable information. So there's a lot of fun things going on now that we have such a wide range of open source tools that we can develop and share. And then Friday, Ralph Evans, his team will really focus on this newer piece of ISFIC, really the built environment. And his expertise is really about modeling and surrogate modeling and machine learning, and how these types of tools, these new numerical approaches, can be used to improve our built environment and our energy systems. So I think it'll be a really great week. I'm not going to introduce everybody. Each day, the moderators or the theme leaders will do that. Today is a little different from the others. If you're joining us Tuesday through Friday, those days will start at 11 o'clock. And you can come in a little bit early. There'll be a bit of a pre-setup time to chat if you like, but the formal presentations will start at 11. And before I shift gears, I do want to speak to the Sue Walton Student Enrichment Fund. So many of you will have heard about this already. So Sue retired a couple of years ago, and at the time we worked to raise some money for a fund, the Sue Walton Student Enrichment Fund, which would be used to support students, social events, networking, extra things that we really try to bring as a center to the experience of our graduate students. And through the generosity of many people, we finally hit the bar, and the bar being we had to get so much money in the pot before it could be officially endowed. And I'm really happy to say that we did it. We've got an endowed fund. So Sue, do you want to say anything? I know you're
sure.
Now, go ahead.
Okay. Yes, welcome. And I'm so glad that the EnVision conference is carrying on. And just a little background, a couple years ago, it was 2 years ago, just before I retired, they asked if I would be interested in having my name against a ICEFIC Student Enrichment Fund. At first I said, absolutely not. But the more I thought about it, I realized that my 28 years with ICEFIC really was all about the students, and they enriched my life, and I hopefully in return I enriched their lives a bit, but it wasn't about accounting and everything else. It was the day-to-day interaction with the students, and we had such a great time, and there was such a wonderful culture, which I feel sad about the students right now. They're not getting that perspective that the alumni did, but hopefully that'll change later this year. And so I decided, yes, that would be great. And then when it was endowed this year, I'm just absolutely thrilled. And the fund is invested in the fossil fuel-free investment pool. And then from that, the earnings are given back to ICEFIC once a year for student activities. And so my dream is, so thank you to everyone who's contributed, but my dream is that maybe everyone can contribute again. Because I was thinking today, it'd be so nice if there was enough money in there for a trip to Cape Scott Wind Farm. A number of years ago, maybe some of you went on it, and it was such a wonderful experience for the students. And so I just think we could set the bar a little higher. And if you want to contribute, you can go to the ICEFIC website, just Google Sue Walton, and it'll take you to the page where you can donate. So that would be great. So maybe when we do EnVision in a couple of years, there'll be enough money there to send a few students to Cape Scott Wind Farm. So that's my dream. So thank you, and I look forward to connecting with a few of you over the next few days. Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, Sue. So that's a great segue. So I do want to let everyone know, so we have the sort of formal session, and then we have what we're calling the after party. And I'm not too sure how the after party is going to actually work, but it's basically a free form opportunity in a sense for everyone to reconnect as best we can. It's not going to be perfect, but we thought we'd have some way to have some breakout rooms. People can chat if you need to leave the meeting, absolutely. But if you want to try and do this online socializing, that's the time. Okay, well, thanks so much, Sue. I am going to stop sharing, and we will do a little transition here to our first panel. Great. Okay, so we should have a few people spotlit for everyone. These are our panelists for the first day. What we would like everyone to do is to hold on questions. We will have a moderated discussion, and then we'll have some time for questions, and we'd like you to type those questions into the chat. Jake will monitor those, and then we can read those off as they come. And then, like I said, at the end, there'll be some breakout rooms that will open up, and you can join those breakout rooms. The chat will be available if you want to try and chat with somebody, directly and say, hey, let's meet in a room. Absolutely, go for it. But like I said, we're kind of experimenting, so we'll see how that works out. Now, shifting gears to our first panel, and I am really pleased to have this generation of researchers together to chat. And we have some key panelists that I'd like to introduce shortly. And then we have a bit of a special guest, which I will also introduce. And then we'll get into our moderated discussion. So for those of you, well, what's it all about? Well, I didn't spend a lot of time on it, but the history of ICEFIC is really a history of hydrogen research. And I've been quite flabbergasted by the amount of news and discussion and sort of common places about hydrogen that we see again today. Clearly, there was lots of activity within the research world. Perhaps not many people knew what a fuel cell was, and now this kind of talk, everyone seems to hear about it. It's very, very popular. So it's returned. And I thought this was a great opportunity for us to actually reflect a little bit upon the time, the last 30 years of research maybe a bit more, and perhaps think about where we're going and why has this happened. So to do that, really have got a great panel for everyone, I hope, some very experienced researchers. And I'm going to start, just going to briefly introduce them, working from, let's say, east to west, and east being Dr. Pierre Bénard, who's with us from Quebec. So he's a professor of physics at the University of Quebec, Trois-Rivières, and the current director of the Hydrogen Research Institute. And this is another institute, somewhat like ICEFIC, that was founded in 1994, dedicated to the use of hydrogen as an alternative energy vector. Dr. Bénard's research interests include microporous absorbance for purification and storage and hydrogen safety. He's been involved in numerous hydrogen initiatives and led a number of research activities for the IEA. He's a member of the board of directors for functional materials in Quebec. He was instrumental in starting an NSERC strategic research network called H2CAN on hydrogen. He is also a member of Quebec's network on intelligent energy systems, and he's on the board of the Canadian Hydrogen Fuel Cell Association. And Dr. Bénard's been working this field, well, he's one of the old generation, so longer than me. Next up is we hit Ontario, and I'm really pleased to have Dr. Brent Pepley. So Dr. Pepley, many of you who are in the fuel cell side perhaps will, I'm sure, know Dr. Pepley. He's older than Pierre or I am. Sorry to give you away here, Brent. He started working way back and was really working actively in electrochemical aspects of fuel cells and PEM systems in 1986 as part of a group at the Royal Military College of Canada. And he was involved in testing and modeling of early PEM fuel cells from Ballard Power. In 2007, he was awarded a Tier 1 Canada Research Chair in fuel cells, and he moved to Queens, just a few blocks away, where he was the founding director of the Fuel Cell Research Center. He's currently a professor in chemical engineering with a cross appointment in mechanical materials engineering. And most recently, he's been working on PEM electrolysis and catalysts for the oxygen evolution electrode. And getting closer to home now, my colleague, Dr. Djilali. Ned is a professor of mechanical engineering, former Tier 1 Canada Research Chair as well, and he has served as the director of ICEFIC in the past and the director of the Pacific Institute for Climate Solutions, which some of you may also know. And so he's been involved in developing and facilitating low carbon energy systems for quite some time. He's trained many graduate students who've gone on to become academics and leaders in industry, many publications, and has been cited by Thomson Reuters as a highly cited researcher. He holds several patents, collaborated with many companies, works with international research centers, serves on editorial boards, and is a fellow of the Royal Society of Canada and of the Canadian Academy of Engineering. So thank you everyone for joining me on this panel, and I'm going to pick your brains and your experience here fairly soon. Before I do that, I would also like to introduce a special guest I believe is out there in the iPad world, and that's Dr. David Scott. And well, I'll have him introduce himself actually in a second. He doesn't know this yet, but Dr. Scott earned his BSc and MSc from Queen's University and his doctorate in mechanical engineering and astronautical sciences from Northwestern University in Chicago. He is Vice President Emeritus of the International Association for Hydrogen Energy. He taught for about 22 years at the University of Toronto, served as the Chair of Mechanical Engineering, and founded the university's Institute for Hydrogen Systems. He chaired a Canadian advisory group on hydrogen opportunities that produced a seminal report, Hydrogen, the National Mission for Canada. Afterwards, he finally got really smart and he moved to the University of Victoria in 1989. And that is when he founded the Institute for Integrated Energy Systems. So Dr. Scott has received many awards, and one of them in particular is the prestigious Jules Verne Award for outstanding contributions to hydrogen physics, hydrogen energy, sociology, and philosophy. So our special guest is out there virtually. And what I would like to do to introduce and motivate the thinking of our panelists is to have David say a few words, but this is going to be David Scott from 30 years ago saying a few words. Now, hopefully this will work. Bear with me, you should see something come up shortly.
The real shakers and movers of the hydrogen community, a longtime colleague and associate, Dr. David Scott. Dr. Scott is currently the director of the Institute for Integrated Energy Systems at the University of Victoria.
So the question is, let's talk about the kind of technologies that we will be talking about. What are they? Well, they're technologies, in my view, that lead us to this emerging hydrogen age. But climate is a highly nonlinear phenomena. It's clearly metastable. There's no doubt about it. You can't change a constituent of planet Earth's atmosphere to the degree to which we've changed the background level of this one constituent, which is CO2, without playing dice with the planet. But the social disruptions will be extraordinary. I think we have got to continually insist upon considering the energy system. In this particular case, you have an energy system which touches every part of our life, and of course, the information system, in a sense, is a part of that. And that is what I've called a case for inevitability here, that civilization must leave fossil sources, and it must leave carbon-based currencies. And now we go back to this energy system. I'll call it a deeper future, and now I just talk about the currencies will be overwhelmingly hydrogen and electricity. Hydrogen can be stored in enormous quantities, electricity cannot. Electricity can transmit energy without moving material. Hydrogen can be a chemical or material feedstock, electricity cannot. Electricity can process, transmit, and store information, hydrogen cannot. On Earth, long-distance transport of hydrogen will win. Well, I would say that the barriers are onboard storage and infrastructure. Okay, now there's not a whole lot we can do about infrastructure at our little institute at the university, but the onboard storage can be something that we hope we can contribute to. I think what we're about is pioneering the hydrogen age. Pioneering the hydrogen age is tougher because there's an immense infrastructure and infrastructural barriers that we have to come over. But if you take joy in being a pioneer, okay, and that's one of the reasons that some of us carry on in spite of the scar tissue, there is no uncertainty about where planet Earth is going. And by the way, it'll lead to a brilliant future. The prophecies of doom will not be fulfilled unless we do something really stupid.
Okay, thank you, David Scott from 1991. And we are now going to have a little bit of fun thinking about what's happened between 1991 and 2021. And all sorts of fun things have happened. But so the panel here is to talk a little bit about what's happened in this sector, but it's also a bit of an opportunity to hear about some of the personal experiences of our panelists, because we've got young students and younger researchers who are starting their journey. And it's always fun to listen to people who've already gone down the path for a while and maybe learn a few things about their experience that can inform our own. So I would like to start with a bit of, allow each of the panelists a couple of minutes just to talk a bit about their personal motivations and reasons that they've spent a lot of time in this field. And Ned, I'd like to start with you. Perhaps you can spend a couple of minutes to tell us a little bit about why you got involved in hydrogen research and really what drove and motivated your work.
Well, thank you, Andrew, and good morning, everyone. It's really a privilege and a pleasure to be here, and especially with my colleagues, Pierre and Brent. For me, it all really started with David Scott taking me to the yacht club for a beer to discuss fuel cells and energy systems, and eventually asking me if I'd be interested in participating in a collaborative research project with Ballard. Soon after that conversation, I recall, which was around 1993, so it was about a year after I joined UVic, he put together an interdisciplinary team consisting exclusively of young and tenured professors from various disciplines. And with the help of a few more beers, he knew how to use beer. He convinced us to stop worrying about tenure altogether and to plunge into new research directions by participating in an ambitious proposal. And this is important. The title of the proposal that we eventually chose was the next generation fuel cell technology. So once upon a time, I was part of the next generation 30 years ago. So we were a very keen bunch, but aside from David, we knew very little about energy systems, fuel cells, or the hydrogen economy. And a few months later, I recall when we had the expert panel come here to assess the proposal, one of the first questions they asked was, of course, what qualified us to undertake such research? And our desperate response was that our lack of directly relevant expertise was in fact an asset because we would not be hindered by or blinkered by prior knowledge. Well, you know, it's a long story. The amazing thing is that this partly wishful thinking was bought by the panel, and we were awarded $2.5 million, which was the largest CRD grant at that time, and the rest was, as they say, history. As a postscript, about 5 years later, we exceeded our own expectations and those of the panel by more than delivering on a number of fronts. So that was sort of my story of how I got involved into this.
Great, thanks, Ned. So moving back across the country, we're going to hit Ontario now, and Brant, maybe you can say a few words as well. Now, what's interesting with Brant is he and I were trotting similar ground. I was marching around the grounds of Kingston back in 1990. I had never heard of a fuel cell, and guess what? Just in a building down the road, here's Brant working away, doing some history of fuel cells. So go ahead, Brant.
Yeah. So in 1986, as was noted, I was hired at the Royal Military College of Canada by a man named Ron Mann, who eventually became my PhD supervisor. And I was just a graduate engineer. I just finished my undergrad, and I pursued a career as a musician, which didn't pay very well. So I thought I should get back to engineering, which I went to the Royal Military College and was lucky enough to be hired. And at that time, Ballard Power Systems, which was called Ballard Technology Corporation, actually at the time, had just completed their first contract with the Department of National Defense and delivered a 5-cell stack, serial number 002, which I was invested with responsibility of testing to verify that it actually met the contract qualifications. So I was flown out to North Vancouver, which was kind of fun. And I went into a laboratory work bay, which was occupied by a guy named David Wilkins and another guy named Danny Epp and another guy named Ken Dirks, the three of them, who were really the ones that had made the big breakthrough. So I was right there at the beginning. And I should note that Dave Wilkins used to keep his motorcycle in the bay. So he looked just like Steve Jobs inventing the Apple computer, only he was inventing the fuel cell. And they taught me how to test fuel cells. So I flew back to Kingston and I started building this fuel cell test station, which was great. It was fun to do that and figure out how to do that at that time. And then I had to start bringing in hydrogen in tanks to fuel the fuel cell. And I quickly realized that one spends a lot of time bringing hydrogen to a fuel cell test station when you've got 5 cells. So I immediately realized that the most important thing in the world was to figure out how to get more hydrogen for fuel cells. And then I basically moved into looking at ways of basically easily moving hydrogen, moving a fuel around that you could convert into hydrogen. So I got involved in a thing called steam reforming, and basically steam reforming methanol to make hydrogen, which became my occupation for some time and got me a paper that was highly quoted. So that's basically what I ended up doing my PhD in. So that's how I got involved and how I got to a point where I realized that making hydrogen was probably the most important thing in the whole exercise of trying to bring fuel cells to popularity. And I just fell in love with fuel cells. I just thought they were the greatest thing ever. So that's about how it started.
Making hydrogen and making music. Thanks, Brant.
Yeah.
And so over to you, Pierre. So Pierre, you come at this from a little different take, and I'm curious to hear your story, because you ended up in obviously a very impactful center with some real powerful personalities, and I'm sure that those probably drove some of your choices with research. But why don't you tell us your story?
Oh, I actually I come from a field which is very far from hydrogen initially, because I'm I graduated my PhD in theoretical condensed matter physics, and basically I worked on what's called basically today quantum materials, and I did my PhD on high temperature superconductivity at the time, which was the hot topic of the late 80s, early 90s. Throughout when I was a graduate student, Hydro-Québec was involved actually in high temperature superconductor conferences. They were very active because the possible applications, of course. And this started me to gravitate towards energy, in my interest in energy in general. So I got a chance to stay in Quebec and join a research group, which was headed by Tapan Bose and Richard Chahine, who was his graduate student and also a professor at the University of Quebec in Trois-Rivières. And I started collaborating they didn't have any theoreticians, so I was the local, basically, homme à tout faire, we would say in French. So I was basically getting involved in several different projects where they needed some theoretical background. So I started getting involved initially in basically adsorption, which was an interesting project for me because it involved hydrogen. It had to be treated somewhat differently than other adsorbents. We needed to include quantum considerations. So I started working with Richard and on adsorption, and then we needed and then hydrogen storage, which was my first foray in hydrogen energy technologies. And then I got involved almost by accident in hydrogen safety. So I was somewhat familiar with fluid mechanics, but I was no expert, far from it, in fluid mechanics. So I got basically involved in this, and then I learned to love fluid mechanics from my involvement in hydrogen safety issues, which we basically tried to develop understanding, and got involved in the IEA workshop, work groups, and eventually HiSafe, which is started in Europe, and basically percolated to that in various other fields like hydrogen purification and everything. But it started with quantum materials and ended up in IEA tasks on hydrogen safety and codes and standards. So the path is really weird sometimes.
So Andrew and Pierre, sort of on that theme of branching out to different areas from those of the original expertise, I think it just reminds me that the problem that drove my initial work, or sort of what I decided to focus on the first year I worked on fuel cell research, was mass transport limitations. Fuel cells, of course, like all energy conversion devices, suffer from losses. And one of the loss mechanisms is due to mass transport, essentially the insufficient supply of oxygen to the catalyst. And people, when I looked into the literature and the research and so on, fuel cell research, and Brent will be able to confirm this, was largely the protected field of electrochemists for a long, long time. And there was a little bit of engineering, but people had been looking at the problem through the lens of diffusion theory and electrochemistry, but largely overlooked the role of fluid dynamics. And that's sort of what gave me my first opening. And we made really good progress, and we're proud of some of the work we produced. And I thought I'd point this out because a couple of years later, we came up with what I thought was a very good paper. And we tried to get it published in the Journal of the Electrochemical Society. And guess what? After a couple of months, I just received something saying, "Who is this guy? Reject." So I was a young untenured professor, and sort of, I went to the chair. We had discussion with the best hour. I said, oh, the way to deal with these things is to simply sort of reformat the paper, put it in a different envelope, and send it to another journal. I sent it to an engineering journal. And now it's one of the most highly cited papers in the field, and it continues to garner 30 or 40 citations a year. So anyway, so don't hesitate to go into areas where you're not necessarily a member of the club.
So I'm coming back to that actually, but before we do, so the advice for the next generation, we'll wrap up with that. But okay, so one question I've been getting from people is, is this hydrogen resurgence real, or is this another piece of the hype cycle? And if you go to our website, you can see the full talk of David Scott from 1991, and we cut the part out, but in there he mentions the scars he has received up until 1991 for the work in the field, and the scars being, of course, a lot of sort of hype and then denial and resurgence coming again. So I think we're back at one of these waves, and I'm wanting to get your thoughts, because you have the hindsight and some foresight, I think, at this point to speak to this. Is this hype? Is this real? And perhaps talk a bit about perceived maybe strategic errors that happened in the past that you think we should avoid for the future. So I think I'll go to Pierre to start us off.
I think that I think it's more than hype this time, because you can see that it's much stronger than what we've seen in the past. I mean, there's like 3 or 4 waves that I can think of in hydrogen, starting from all the way in the 70s during the some political crisis with oil supply. In the 80s, it was the end of oil, so the Hubbard peak, and then there was Ballard that started how we could use hydrogen differently in vehicular applications. There was another resurgence in the 90s, I forget exactly what. But anyway, this is different than these others because the technology is much more ready. And also for me, there has been a correlation between the cost of renewable electricity and hydrogen. For me, it's a fundamental input, and it basically has been crashing since 10 years. And I think the tail end of this is basically what we're seeing with hydrogen. There's been, of course, the cost and reliability of the systems have improved significantly over the last since we've been here, basically. And hydrogen also, I think one of the problems for me that we basically forgot what David said. He always saw hydrogen. We always see hydrogen as a systemic issue. Hydrogen as a systems role, and basically the focus for many years has been the car, and I'm not sure that has been helpful, because hydrogen is much more than the car, and I think that's what we're seeing here. It's because the focus now is not only the car, and it's actually not the car in Canada. It's different. All
right, thanks. Brent, do you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, and I agree with what Pierre is saying, and I think that the reason that this is not hype is because we've basically moved to a point where there's a serious effort to reduce carbon emissions, and that's going to take a lot of renewable energy on the grid. And whether you like it or not, you've got to figure out how to store a lot of that energy. And hydrogen is pretty much the only candidate that can do that well enough. And seasonal storage is going to be a crucial issue in a lot of places. And if you look at all of the energy storage systems that are out there, there's only 3 that even come close to looking at seasonal: pumped hydro storage, compressed air storage, and hydrogen. And right now, hydrogen is way out in the lead. And if you look, there's a really good paper in the IEA collection of reports that describe the role of hydrogen and just how central it's going to be in that role of making the penetration of renewables, intermittent renewables specifically, able to reach a level that's going to make a difference in terms of carbon emissions. So I think that is the real driving, a big driving force, not the real driving force. And the fact that you can also use hydrogen as a transportation fuel as well as a grid scale storage medium, I think gives it an extra boost. And there's only so much lithium in the world, and that's not going to meet all our transportation needs. And lithium batteries are heavy no matter how you look at it. So as soon as you get to any sizable type of transportation, long haul trucks or boats or hopefully eventually airplanes, hydrogen again is the winner in that transportation sector. So that's what I think is the driver. Yep.
Thanks, Brent. Okay, Ned.
So yeah, I'm sort of, I think exactly along the same lines as Brent and Pierre. I think it's clear that you know, with hindsight, the strategic error that was made in the past was really that focus of fuel cell development on what was really and still is the holy grail of passenger vehicles. And really, and I think this is where we're going. The initial focus should have been on heavy duty vehicles and hard to decarbonize sectors, trucks, buses, shipping in particular. What really makes me hopeful with sort of this new resurgence is that it's much broader in scope. And it also entails a very significant commitment and engagement of national governments in Europe and Asia. And it's of particular note, 3 of the countries that are the most engaged in this are Japan, South Korea, and Germany, which have a history of being ahead of the curve in terms of innovation and strategic thinking in a way. So, again, sort of to reemphasize some of what was said, I think, you know, if we look back at where renewable energy, in particular PV and wind, were 15, 20 years ago, and the concerns that people had with them, which were legitimate, and where we are now with the cost of renewable electricity, where we are is largely due to interventionist policies from government that support the development, the initial development of these technologies. And what we're seeing now is, again, something that's along these lines that I think bodes very well, particularly what's coming up in the US with the Biden administration commitment to really attacking the climate change issues in a frontal manner.
So just to stick on this theme, and maybe more about these strategic errors made in the past. You know, I feel like when I was starting out, we were really quite a leader. You know, Canada was a leader in this field, and as you said, Ned, there's other places that now seem to have grabbed the baton, but we still have tremendous knowledge, capacity, and you know, industry in this area in Canada. So, are there things that, if we're talking to maybe it's our policy makers, that we should be doing differently this time, that's going to hopefully leverage our capabilities that we still have, or are we going to lose out? Pierre, how about you?
Well, from the perspective of Quebec, we're coming further back compared to BC, basically, where you have a very strong basis in fuel cells and various other hydrogen technologies. So Quebec, I see it with the difficulty in coming with our hydrogen plan, you know, where we still, well, it's coming, but it's a bit of a struggle in how much the government is ready to invest. And I know now that there's a huge amount of interest because we get phone calls all the time about hydrogen energy technologies from big companies that want to get involved but don't know quite how. I think we have a strong basis, strong history, basically academic and industrial. I mean, fuel cells, current use came basically from Canada, from Ballard and Hydrogenics later on. And I think we've, depending on the response of the government, we might be able to you know, capitalize on that past investment. But there's a lot of lot of competition going on. In France also, people don't think about France, but they have a huge plan also, 7 billion euros, if I'm not mistaken. I've been to EnVision just recently, recently, that was my last trip before the pandemic. And there were so many companies that I was expecting a small event, but there were like 2,000 people per day. And I don't know how many companies that were interested in getting involved in hydrogen. Right now we're seeing this in Quebec, but and there's some history, but I don't know. I don't have a clear answer on this. I'm hoping that it can be, but anyway.
Okay, thank you. Brant, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, well, there seems to be a challenge in terms of getting the policymakers to understand what needs to be done. I find at times it's frustrating the approach that's put forward. I'm talking on a federal level. They have taken the initiative to put in a national hydrogen policy, but still in terms of really focusing on how that's going to reduce carbon emissions and really getting serious about, as much as carbon capture and storage is a technology that's, come a long way and does make some sense. The storage part of it makes it really tough. There's only so many places to park carbon dioxide on the planet. So then you get into carbon capture and utilization, which is also a very difficult thing. I really think that electrolysis is the solution that's going to ultimately need to be used. And that's a tall order. But I think that Canada has the capability to do that, but it needs to be supported on the federal level. You can't just say, oh, we're going to, get serious about having hydrogen unless you actually support those corporations that are working on it. And it has been frustrating to me to watch that drop in support and that lack of sort of focusing. I mean, the number of Canadian companies that have been just bought out, it's an exasperating thing. But there are companies out there that I think if they were given support, they could really make a significant contribution to getting to what is green hydrogen. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of blue hydrogen around, and we'll probably have some pink hydrogen from nuclear power plants for a while too. But ultimately, I think we've got to get to green hydrogen. I think that's got to be supported, and that's going to take electrolysis research. That's the way I see it.
Great. Okay, thanks, Brant. And Ned?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the key focus in terms of really ensuring that this doesn't peter out is really to stimulate the deployment of hydrogen infrastructure. And there is no ways about it. We need to be going through the route of hydrogen electrolysis for that. I noted a question that perhaps will come up later on, sort of from Aaron Fike, I think, in the chat, that relates exactly to this issue, that earlier on there were many concerns about the round trip efficiencies of doing hydrogen electrolysis. But of course, with increasing supply of curtailed electricity, then the issue of efficiency is not such a roadblock any longer. So clearly, I think we need to focus quite a bit of research on that system perspective that will provide policymakers with the understanding and the tools to be able to devise policies, and in particular supportive market incentives to allow the deployment of the hydrogen infrastructure. I think from a technology viewpoint, the underlying technologies, whether it's how you transport hydrogen, how you store it, how the electrolyzers, PEM fuel cells, they're all at a readiness level that is quite adequate for commercialization. That's not really the roadblock. The only other area I think where Canada ought to think seriously about sort of the future in order to capitalize on this opportunity is what happens if indeed there is mass commercialization of fuel cell technology? That will largely depend not so much on further progress in the technology itself, but on development of mass manufacturing techniques. So I think an area of research which is really critical is that of sort of methods for mass manufacturing that will bring about reduction in costs. So I'm not talking just simply about automated assembly of stacks and manufacturing of bipolar plates, etc. But for example, one key crucial area is that of catalysts and the deposition of catalysts. Well, the way we still make MEAs is still sort of a bit of an art, and it's sort of quasi-manual, and we need to move to advanced techniques where you allow automated deposition of catalysts in a controlled manner to achieve the structures that you want, etc. So I think that's a crucial area to really capitalize on the commercial potential.
Well, if I may, Andrew, one hopeful thing in Quebec that I see is the number of serious major electrolysis project that we're seeing from Hydro-Québec especially. So if Hydro-Québec is committed enough to build a huge electrolyzer in the Varennes region, even though if it's for synthetic fuels, it's quite interesting. It's the same thing with Hydrogénal or Air Liquide in our own background, which is just install the biggest PEM electrolyzers in the world for now. And there's another project in the Gatineau area for basically how to produce hydrogen to inject in the natural gas network. So there's a lot of them happening, and there's at least 5 I can think of. So it's very sudden. It's not government driven, really. It's so it's quite interesting.
So Brant,
I was just going to interject a little comment there. So I've been involved in reviewing a lot of proposals in the European Union, and what's happening in Germany. I mean, Hydrogenics is building a huge electrolysis system in the north of Germany, which is coupled with a wind farm there that's underutilized and normally curtailed. And then Air Liquide is transporting that hydrogen that's produced to rail stations to refuel the hydrogen fuel cell trains that are going through. So and you mentioned that, Ned. I mean, the Germans seem to be able to motivate things to happen like that, and that's what we need to see as well in Canada. And I agree with what you're saying, Pierre, that there are big systems being put in, but I think it needs to be able to be nicely coupled with renewables in an effective way. And I know Quebec has got a lot of hydroelectric, and that's a huge bonus for them. But I think we've got to go right across the country in that category. So, anyways.
So Brant, circling back a little bit, we're talking a bit about opportunities, I guess, and gaps. You started off with, your research started out with a lot of methanol. Can you comment on that? Or are we also, we're talking hydrogen, but should we still be maybe throwing some money at the synthetic fuel pathways? What do you think? Is methanol something we should come back to?
No, I don't think we should go back to methanol. I think methanol, comes from a fossil fuel origin in most instances, and it's hard to work around that. And actually, I've got, this is where I got to quote the fact that I used to be called the dirty hydrogen guy by Tappan Boats, which I really resented, but I now consider that was a very insightful comment about me. And I was the dirty hydrogen guy making hydrogen from methanol. But there are some really neat